In Institutes of Christian Faith, we explore a journey of knowledge profound and vast. Book 1, Chapter 1, Section 3, Unwrapped. Tapestry woven with threads of grace, John Calvin's wisdom a guiding light. Let's delve into this treasure trove tonight. Human heart, a mysterious domain. In Chapter 1, Section 3, we gain insight profound, a mirror unveiled. To human nature, its essence detailed. In seeking truth, our hearts take flight, guided by Calvin's profound insight. Our knowledge of God, a sacred start, our hearts and minds entwined, never apart. Yet shadows of darkness, sins they cast, obscuring the mirror, dimming the past. Still God's grace, a radiant light, illumines the path, restores our sight. But what is the source of knowledge true? A spark within, like morning dew? God's Spirit moves, the veil is lifted, a gift bestowed, our hearts are gifted. Through Scripture's passage, truths ignite, guided by Calvin's illuminating light. Our Father's image, though marred by sin, restored through Christ, new life begins. A journey of faith, thus striving toward the heavenly call, a path restored. Calvin's words, a beacon bright, guiding us through faith's transformative flight. So let us ponder this sacred theme in Calvin's words, a guiding stream. Section 3, a chapter profound, Institutes of Faith, where truth is found. A journey of faith our hearts ignite in the sacred tapestry of insight. Welcome to my Fortress of Theology. I am Jonathan, a Cage Stage Crusader. Thank you for joining me on my pilgrimage to join Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion. Today I finished chapter 1 with the third section, so let's not wait and dive into what Calvin has to teach us. Section 3 reads, hence that dread amazement with which, as Scripture uniformly relates, holy men were struck and overwhelmed when they beheld the presence of God. When we see those who previously stood firm and secure, so quaking with terror that the fear of death takes hold of them, nay, they are in a matter swallowed up and annihilated, the inference to be drawn is that men are never duly touched and impressed with the conviction of their insignificance until they have contrasted themselves with the majesty of God. Frequent examples of this consternation occur both in the book of Judges and the prophetical writings, so much so that it was made a common expression among the people of God, who shall die, for we have seen the Lord. Hence the book of Job, also in humbling men under a conviction of their folly, feebleness, and pollution, always derives its chief argument from descriptions of the divine wisdom, virtue, and purity. Nor without cause, for we see Abraham the readier to acknowledge himself with dust and ashes, the nearer he approaches to behold the glory of the Lord, and Elijah, unable to wait with unveiled face for his approach, so dreadful is the sight. And what can man do? Man who is but rottenness and a worm, when even the cherubim themselves must veil their faces in very terror. To this undoubtedly the prophet Isaiah refers when he says, Isaiah 24:23, the moon shall be confounded, the sun ashamed, when the Lord of hosts shall reign, i.e., when he shall exhibit his refulgence and give a nearer view of it, the brightest objects will, in comparison, be covered with darkness. But though the knowledge of God and the knowledge of ourselves are bound together by a mutual tie, due arrangement requires that we treat the former in the first place and then descend to the latter. So in this section, we can see that Calvin makes 9 points. He introduces the theme of this section, hence the dread and amazement with which, as Scripture uniformly relates, holy men were struck and overwhelmed whenever they beheld the presence of God. The second point is on the impact of God's presence on humans. When we see those who previously stood firm and secure, so quaking in terror, that the fear of God takes hold of them. The third point is the significance of contrasting with God's majesty. The inference to be drawn is that men are never duly touched or impressed with the conviction of their insignificance until they have contrasted themselves with the majesty of God. The fourth point is examples of consternation in the Scripture. Frequent examples of this consternation occur both in the book of Judges and the prophetical writings. Fifth point is the use of divine descriptions in humbling humanity. Hence, the book of Job also in humbling men under the conviction of their folly, feebleness, and pollution always derives its chief argument from the descriptions of the divine wisdom, virtue, and purity. The sixth point is examples of human reactions to God's glory. We see Abraham the readier to acknowledge himself, but dust and ashes the nearer he approaches to behold the glory of the Lord. Seventh point is contrast with the cherubim's reaction. And what can man do, who man is but rottenness and a worm, when even the cherubim themselves must veil their faces in very terror. The eighth point, the prophet Isaiah's reference to God's radiance. The moon shall be confounded and the sun ashamed, and the Lord of hosts shall reign. The ninth point is the interconnectedness of the knowledge of God and self. But through the knowledge of God and knowledge of themselves are bound together by mutual tie, due arrangement requires we treat the former in the first place, and then descend to the latter. Now let's break down the first point. Hence the dread amazement with which, as Scripture uniformly relates, holy men were struck and overwhelmed when they beheld the presence of God. Think about a time when you visited a majestic natural wonder like a towering waterfall in a lush forest. You and your family decide to go visit a famous waterfall during your vacation. You've seen pictures and heard stories about its grandeur. You're so excited to witness it in person. As you hike closer to the waterfall, the sound of rushing water grows louder. You catch glimpses of the cascading water through the trees, and your excitement builds. As you finally reach the waterfall, you're struck by its sheer size and the force of the water plummeting down. The sight, the sound, the spray of water create a sense of awe and amazement. You feel small in comparison to the immense power of nature. Standing before the waterfall, you're filled with a mix of emotions, a combination of wonder, reverence, and a touch of fear. The sheer magnificence of this scene is both humbling and captivating. After spending some time taking in the sight, you and your family find a spot and sit and reflect. Talk about the water's presence, how the water's presence made you feel, how it left you in awe of the natural world's beauty and power. In this example, the experience of encountering the breathtaking waterfall is akin to the sense of dread and amazement the holy men in Scripture felt when they beheld the presence of God. Just as the grandeur of the waterfall overwhelmed you and stirred a mix of emotions, the presence of God described by Scripture left these holy individuals struck by the magnificence and power of the divine. The awe and reverence you felt for the waterfall give you a glimpse into the profound encounter that holy men had with God's presence. This real world example helps illuminate the concept of being overwhelmed by something awe inspiring and much greater than themselves, which aligns with the idea Calvin presents in his introductory point. On point two, the impact of God's presence on humans. When we see those who previously stood firm and secure, so quaking with terror that the fear of death would take hold of them, nay, they are, in a manner, swallowed up and annihilated. Another uh, real world example that can illustrate this is think about a roller coaster ride at an amusement park. Here's how it would relate to the presence of God's presence on humans. Imagine you and your friends decide to try a new daring roller coaster. You're confident and excited as you stand in line, anticipating the thrill of the ride. As you board the roller coaster, it starts moving. You feel the initial rush of excitement. Twists and turns are intense, but you're still holding on to your confidence. However, as the ride goes on, it becomes faster and more intense than you expected. The loops and drops start to make your heart race. You begin to feel a mix of fear and exhilaration. As the roller coaster continues its wild journey, you start to feel a sense of fear creeping in. Speed and unexpected drops make you realize that you are not in control, as you thought. At the most intense moment of the ride, your confidence is completely shaken. You're no longer standing firm and secure. Instead, the fear is so intense that it feels as though your confidence has been swallowed up, and you're left feeling overwhelmed. As the ride ends, you and your friends step off the roller coaster with a mix of emotions. Talk about how the intense experience made you feel, the initial confidence, the growing fear, the moment when you felt it like your sense of security was annihilated. In this example, the roller coaster's ride's impact on your emotions and sense of security mirrors the way that holy men in Scripture were affected by the presence of God. Just as your initial confidence turned to fear and a sense of being overwhelmed on the roller coaster, holy men who encountered God's presence experienced a similar transformation of emotions. This real world example helps illustrate the concept of a powerful encounter that shakes one's sense of security and leaves a profound impact. Calvin describes in his point about the impact of God's presence on humans. On to point three, the significance of contrasting God's majesty. The inference to be drawn is that men are never duly touched and impressed with the conviction of their insignificance until they have contrasted themselves with the majesty of God. Think about stargazing on a clear night. How would it relate to the significance of contrasting with God's majesty? Imagine you're far away from city lights, standing under a starlit sky. The sheer number of stars and the vastness of the universe leaves you in awe. As you gaze at the stars, you start to realize just how small and insignificant you are in the grand scheme of the cosmos. The sheer magnitude of the universe makes you feel like a tiny speck in comparison. The more you contemplate the vastness of the universe, the more you contrast it with your own existence. Your worries, concerns, and daily troubles seem so small when compared to the enormity of space. This contrast changes your perspective. You begin to appreciate the beauty and complexity of the universe, while also recognizing your own limited scope in the grand design. Standing beneath the stars, you feel a sense of humility, the realization of your insignificance in the face of the cosmos, prompt a humbling and grounding experience. After spending time stargazing, you reflect on how the experience has affected your perspective. You understand that while you may be small, you're still part of this incredible universe. In this example, the act of stargazing and contrasting your own existence with the vastness of the universe helps illustrate the point that holy men in Scripture recognize their own insignificance when they contrast themselves with the majesty of God. Just as contemplating the cosmos can lead to a sense of humility and perspective, considering God's majesty brings about a similar realization of one's own limitations and the grandeur of the design. This real world example helps illuminate the concept of finding perspective and humility through contrasting our own existence with something much greater. As Kelvin discusses in his point about the significance of contrasting with God's majesty, the fourth point, examples of consternation in Scripture. Frequent examples of this consternation occur both in the book of Judges and the prophetical writings, so much so that it was a common expression among the people of God: "We shall die, for we have seen the Lord." In the book of Judges, we encounter the story of Gideon. He was chosen by God to lead the Israelites in battle against their enemies. When Gideon realizes he had been in the presence of the divine messenger in Judges chapter 6, he experiences fear and consternation. This fear is a natural reaction of being in the presence of the Almighty, highlighting the awe and humility inspired by God's presence. In the prophet Isaiah's writings, we find a remarkable example of consternation. In Isaiah's vision of God's glory, Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah witnesses heavenly beings surrounding the throne of God, and he exclaims, "Woe to me, for I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips." Isaiah's response reflects the overwhelming sense of unworthiness and awe in the presence of the divine. John Calvin's commentary on Isaiah 6 highlights the prophet's realization of his own inadequacy and immediate response of awe and reverence. Calvin emphasizes that Isaiah's vision exposes the true nature of humanity's unworthiness before God's holiness. This example underscores how encountering God's presence can evoke feelings of consternation and humility. The mention of a common expression among the people of God, "We shall die, for we have seen the Lord," underscores the profound impact of experiencing God's presence. This expression indicates a deep understanding of the immense contrast between the divine and human, where encountering God brings a sense of trepidation due to the inherent holiness and majesty of the Almighty. In these instances from the book of Judges and the prophetical writings, we witness examples of consternation and fear when individuals come into the presence of God. These reactions emphasize the deep reverence and humility that arises when humans encounter the divine. John Calvin's commentary on these passages further elaborates on the significance of these reactions, highlighting the themes of human unworthiness and the overwhelming holiness of God's presence. This aligns with Calvin's point about the frequent examples of consternation in Scripture, illustrating the powerful impact of encountering God's presence on individuals. On the fifth point, the use of divine descriptions in humbling humility. Hence, the book of Job, also in humbling men under the conviction of their folly, feebleness, and pollution, always derives its chief argument from the descriptions of the divine wisdom, virtue, and purity. Imagine standing on a beach during a powerful storm. The crashing waves, roaring winds, and lightning strikes remind you of nature's immense forces. In such a moment, you may feel humbled by your own vulnerability and insignificance compared to the might of the elements. Similarly, the book of Job describes God's creative power and control over natural phenomena in Job 38 41, highlighting human frailty and the grandeur of the divine. In John Calvin's commentary on the book of Job, he emphasizes how God's speeches to Job reveal a vast gap between human understanding and divine wisdom. Calvin discusses how God's descriptions of his creative acts, knowledge of the cosmos, and power over creatures serves to humble Job and demonstrate the limitations of human knowledge. These divine descriptions highlight the folly and feebleness of human wisdom when contrasted with God's infinite goodness, infinite understanding. Throughout the book of Job, we see Job's progression from questioning his suffering to acknowledging God's wisdom and supremacy. In Job 42, 1 to 6, Job responds by saying, I know that you can do all things, no purpose of yours can be thwarted. This response underscores the humbling effect of recognizing God's divine wisdom and power, leading to a shift in Job's perspective and understanding of his own limitations. The book of Job constantly portrays God's attributes of wisdom, virtue, and purity as integral to humbling humanity. Divine descriptions of these attributes remind individuals of their limited understanding and inherent imperfections. Descriptions serve as a contrast to human folly and remind us that true wisdom and virtue reside with God. In the example of the stormy beach and the insights from the book of Job and John Calvin's commentary, we see how descriptions of divine wisdom, virtue, and purity are used to humble humanity. Just as the raw power of a storm can make you aware of your smallness, Job's encounters with God's descriptions of his attributes remind us of our limited understanding and the need for humility. Calvin's commentary further emphasizes how Job's journey from questioning to acknowledgement aligns with the theme of deriving humility from divine descriptions in the book. This aligns with Calvin's point about the book of Job, using descriptions of God's attributes to humble individuals and reveal the contrast between human folly and divine wisdom. With point six of examples of human reactions to God's glory, we see Abraham the readier to acknowledge himself, but dust and ashes the nearer he approaches to behold the glory of the Lord. And Elijah, unable to wait with unveiled face for his approach, so dreadful is the sight. Imagine standing before a colossal and awe-inspiring monument like the Great Pyramids of Egypt. As you get closer, the sheer size and magnificence of the structure makes you feel smaller and more insignificant. Similarly, Abraham's reaction when approaching the glory of the Lord reflects a heightened awareness of his own human limitations and the vastness of the divine. In Genesis 18, Abraham encounters three visitors who turn out to be divine messengers. As they speak about the impending birth of Isaac, Abraham realizes he is in the presence of the divine. He responds by acknowledging his unworthiness by saying, I am but dust and ashes. Genesis 18:27. This reaction underscores how encountering God's glory prompts humility and a sense of human frailty. John Calvin's commentary on Genesis 18 emphasizes Abraham's humility in the face of God's glory. Calvin discusses how Abraham's response to reflects an understanding of his own significance compared to the divine majesty. This instance illustrates the profound effect of recognizing God's greatness on Abraham's self perception. Elijah's encounter with God on Mount Horeb further exemplifies human reactions to God's glory. In 1 Kings chapter 19, Elijah experiences a powerful wind, an earthquake, and a fire. It is the gentle whisper that he recognizes God's presence. Elijah covers his face with his cloak, 1 Kings 19:13, as a sign of reverence and awe, illustrating the instinctive human response to the overwhelming presence of God. Just as witnessing a sudden, unexpected phenomenon can evoke a mixture of fear and awe, Abraham's acknowledgement of his own significance and Elijah's act of covering his face highlight the instinctive human response to the divine presence. The sense of dread and awe underscores the overwhelming nature and encountering God's glory. In the example of approaching a grand monument and the insights from the experiences of Abraham and Elijah, we see how human reactions to God's glory are characterized by humility, awe, and a sense of human limitations. Just as standing before a monumental structure can evoke feelings of smallness, encountering God's glory prompts individuals like Abraham and Elijah to acknowledge their own insignificance in the face of the divine majesty. Calvin's commentary further elaborates on the significance of these reactions, highlighting the themes of humility and reverence when confronted with God's glory. He aligns with Calvin's point about the examples of human reactions to God's glory, illustrating the powerful impact of encountering God's presence on individuals. The next point, number 7, contrast with the cherubim's reaction. And what can man do who has put rottenness in a worm when even the cherubim themselves must veil their faces in very terror? Imagine attending a breathtaking performance like an orchestra playing a magnificent symphony. As the music swells and fills the concert hall, you might be so overwhelmed by its grandeur, you find yourself speechless and unable to fully grasp its beauty. Similarly, the cherubim's reactions to God's presence signifies a level of awe and reverence that leaves even these celestial beings in a state of trembling. The cherubim are often associated with guarding God's holiness and dwelling place. In the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle, they symbolize the presence of God and His majesty in Exodus 25. When the cherubim are mentioned, it underscores the immense reverence surrounding God's presence. John Calvin's commentary explains how the cherubim's veiling of their faces is a vivid depiction of their recognition of God's unapproachable holiness. Calvin discusses how even these celestial beings, who are closer to the divine than humans, are filled with awe and fear in the presence of God's glory. It exemplifies the overwhelming impact of God's holiness on all creatures. Just as being in the presence of an awe-inspiring performance can render you speechless, cherubim's veiling of their faces highlights the instinctive human response to overwhelming beauty and majesty. This reaction transcends human and angelic nature, illustrating the universal effect of encountering the divine. The act of veiling one's face is often associated with humility and submission. For example, a bride may wear a veil during a wedding ceremony as a symbol of reverence and modesty. Similarly, the cherubim's veiling of their faces signifies their profound respect and acknowledgement of God's incomparable holiness. In the example of attending a majestic performance and the insights from the cherubim's reaction, we can see how the act of veiling faces and the cherubim's response symbolize an overwhelming recognition of God's holiness. Just as the beauty of a performance can leave you in awe, the cherubim's reverence and submission before God's glory illustrate the universal response of creatures, whether human or celestial, to the divine majesty. Calvin's commentary further emphasizes the significance of this reaction, highlighting the profound humility and reverence that arise when encountering God's holiness. This aligns with Calvin's point about the contrast between humans and cherubim's reactions, underscoring the universal impact of God's presence on all beings. The eighth point, the prophet Isaiah's reference to God's radiance. To this, undoubtedly, the prophet Isaiah refers when he says in Isaiah 24, verse 23, the moon shall be confounded and the sun ashamed when the Lord of hosts shall reign, i.e., when he shall exhibit his refulgence and give a nearer view of it. The brightest of objects will, in comparison, be covered with darkness. Imagine standing in a city and witnessing the break of dawn. As the first rays of the sun emerge on the horizon, they gradually illuminate the cityscape, revealing its beauty. The contrast between the darkness of night and the brilliance of the rising sun highlights the powerful effect of light on our perception. Similarly, Isaiah's reference to the Lord's radiance underscores the overwhelming brightness of God's presence compared to even the most luminous objects in our world. In Isaiah 24, verse 23, the prophet foretells a time when the Lord's reign will be so magnificent and radiant that even the moon and the sun will seem pale in comparison. Imagery conveys the idea that the glory of God's presence is beyond anything we can comprehend, even causing the brightest natural phenomenon to fade into insignificance. John Calvin's commentary on Isaiah 24, verse 23, explains that this verse symbolizes the superior brightness of God's glory. Calvin discusses how the comparison between God's radiance and the sun and moon serves to illustrate the incomparable majesty of God's reign. This commentary highlights the overwhelming nature of God's presence and its transformative impact on everything else. Just as the first light of dawn can dispel the darkness and reveal the beauty of a city, Isaiah's reference to God's radiance symbolizes the illuminating and transforming power of God's presence. The image of the moon and sun being confounded and ashamed conveys the idea that all other sources of light pale in comparison to the brilliance of God. Think of witnessing a grand fireworks display at night. The dazzling explosions of light capture your attention and leave you in awe. Similarly, Isaiah's prophecy paints a picture of divine illumination, so breathtaking that it renders even the most luminous objects in nature as dim shadows. In the example of a dazzling sunrise over a city and insights from Isaiah's prophecy, we can see how the symbolism of divine radiance conveys the overwhelming brightness and majesty of God's presence. Just as the first rays of the sun can transform a cityscape, Isaiah's reference illustrates the transformative power of encountering God's glory. Calvin's commentary further underscores the significance of this symbolism, highlighting the contrast between God's radiance and the brightest natural phenomenon. This aligns with Calvin's point about Isaiah's reference to God's radiance, emphasizing the unparalleled brilliance of God's presence. And the final point, the interconnectedness of God Himself. But through the knowledge of God and the knowledge of ourselves are bound together by a mutual tie, due arrangement requires that we treat of the former in the first place, and then descend to the latter. Imagine you're trying to solve a complex jigsaw puzzle. As you begin, you may examine the individual pieces and their intricate details. However, to fully comprehend the entire picture, you need to understand how each piece fits into the whole. Similarly, Calvin's assertion that knowledge of God and self are bound together reflects the idea that understanding one's relationship with God enhances one's understanding of oneself. Consider learning a new subject in school like history. You might begin by studying key events and figures before delving into the nuances of each historical period. Similarly, Calvin suggests that it's essential to start by exploring the knowledge of God as a foundation before delving into an exploration of self awareness. John Calvin emphasizes the due arrangement of knowledge and God and self, of God and self. His approach is akin to building a strong structure where the foundation, knowledge of God, supports the superstructure, knowledge of self. By prioritizing the study of God's nature, attributes, and presence, individuals gain a clearer lens through which to understand their own identity. Think about forming a new friendship. Before truly understanding your friend's thoughts, feelings, and values, you need to spend time together to get to know them. Similarly, Calvin's approach suggests that by comprehending God's character and intentions, lays the groundwork for a deeper understanding of oneself and one's purpose. Imagine looking through a telescope to observe the stars. The clearer your view of the cosmos, the better you can appreciate the vastness and complexity of the universe. Similarly, Calvin's sequence of prioritizing God's knowledge offers a broader perspective that enriches our understanding of our own place in the grand scheme of things. In this example of solving a puzzle and the insights from education, relationships, and exploration, we see how knowledge of God and self are interconnected. Just as understanding the pieces of a puzzle contribute to comprehending the whole, Calvin's emphasis on due arrangement underscores that a solid understanding of God's nature enhances our comprehension of our own identity and purpose. This approach aligns with Calvin's point about the interconnectedness of knowledge of God and self, emphasizing the significance of prioritizing the study of God as a foundational step towards understanding oneself. In Calvin's words, the truth does unfold, a sacred tome, his wisdom shining gem. From God's grand throne, the knowledge pure, a mirror reflecting his divine decree. With open heart, let's journey through to grasp the essence of Calvin's creed. In Book 1, Chapter 1, Section 3, we delve. He lays the groundwork, a solid base for wisdom's temple, firm and unshaken, the knowledge of God, our first embrace, a cornerstone where faith is reawakened. Profound insight, Calvin leads the way to ponder God's majesty, infinite and high. Through nature's lens, his glory on display, creation's artistry, painting the cosmic sky. Yet Calvin warns of frail human minds, bound by earthly limits, a lens of murk. The light of God's truth sometimes blinds, yet in his presence our soul shall work. As we seek God's face, a fire ignites, a humble recognition of our own, in stark contrast to his radiant light. Our weaknesses exposed, gracefully shown. True knowledge blooms, intertwining the two. God's brilliance and our lowly state, a tapestry woven in red and blue, revealing love's plan, our destined fate. Calvin's guidance, our hearts unfold to grasp the essence of faith's grand scheme. In Book 1, Chapter 1, Section 3, behold, a journey of souls like a sacred dream. Until next time, continue to follow Jesus, who is the way.